Many drivers believe that asphalt is just dead stone beneath their wheels. But I know for certain, every road has a hidden side. The one that reveals itself only when you are too exhausted to distinguish reality from a nightmare, and too alone in your cabin for anyone else to confirm your words. On the E40 highway, somewhere between Wrocław and the German border, there's a stretch that old-timers call the dead loop. There, clocks stop, the radio spits out the voices of those who haven't checked in for years, and things appear in the rearview mirror that have no right to exist in our world. If you are behind the wheel right now and feel the night suddenly grow too cold, while your headlights seem to drown in a thick, oily blackness, do not look back. Just hit the gas. Now, I will tell you why my van arrived in Paris with a completely full tank, even though I hadn't refueled for 1,000 kilometers, and what terrifying discovery I made in the cargo hold after I crossed that invisible line. The road is a living organism. It breathes scorched asphalt. It absorbs the fatigue and thoughts of thousands of people. And sometimes, when the night grows too dense, it begins to play games with you. Games where only the road knows the rules. I have learned the Przemyśl Paris route down to the last crack in the concrete. Every gas station, every motel, every sign. These are my old acquaintances that usually help me stay tethered to reality. But that night, everything was different from the very start. The air was heavy and still, like before a great storm that never dared to break. I left with a delay, irritated by a long loading process. And I knew the most difficult part of the journey would fall during the so-called Hour of the Wolf. That short stretch of time before dawn when the human spirit is at its weakest and the boundary between worlds becomes thin and brittle, like old glass. When my speedometer hit the 400-kilometer mark past Wrocław, the radio in the cabin suddenly choked on white noise. I turned the tuning knob, trying to find any Polish or German station. But instead of music or news, I heard a strange sound. These weren't ordinary radio interferences. It was whispering. Hundreds, thousands of voices trying to shout over each other. But the sound was so distorted, as if they were screaming to me from the very bottom of the ocean. I turned the sound off completely, but the silence that fell over the cabin proved even worse. It was loud. It pressed against my eardrums as if all the air had suddenly vanished from outside the van. I glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping to see the familiar lights of another truck or even a random car. Far behind, 2 dim lights flickered. A normal car, I thought then, feeling a wave of relief. But it didn't get closer, and it didn't fall back. It stayed at a fixed distance, exactly 200 meters behind me, regardless of how I pressed the pedal. I added gas, the needle crawled toward 120, the lights accelerated in sync with me. I dropped my speed to a minimum, almost stopping on the empty highway. The lights froze too, shining with a cold, deathly glow. This wasn't a patrol. This wasn't another carrier. It was something that was simply watching me, waiting for my mistake. I tried to focus on the road, but my own headlights began to behave abnormally. They no longer cut through the night. They seemed to bog down in it, becoming dim and yellow. The asphalt ahead looked like an infinite black hole swallowing the light. Suddenly, the navigator, my loyal companion, just went mad. The screen flashed blood red, the arrow began to spin around its axis, and the voice that usually guided the way turned into a horrific metallic screech that uttered only one phrase. In 100 meters, turn into the abyss. I ripped the power cord from the socket, but the device continued to glow, searing my eyes with that hellish color. That was when I saw her for the first time. On the very edge of the headlight's reach, on the right shoulder, stood a woman. She was dressed in a long, heavy dress, the color of which seemed gray, like ash. She didn't wave her hand. She made no gestures like those typically used by someone needing help. She just stood there, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as if her neck were broken. As my van flew past her at high speed, I caught a glimpse of her face. It was white as chalk, and instead of eyes, there were 2 dark voids. It seemed to me that she smiled as I passed. Cold sweat poured down my back, soaking my shirt. I tried to convince myself it was just a post or a bush playing tricks on my imagination. But 2 minutes later, she was standing ahead again. The same woman, in the same pose, with that same horrific head tilt. It was physically impossible. I was driving straight on a high-speed motorway, never turning once. A straight line, no loops. How could she be ahead of me again? I shoved the gas pedal into the floor until the metal almost groaned. The engine roared at the edge of its limits. The van began to vibrate dangerously, and the speed surpassed all permitted boundaries. I closed my eyes for one long second, praying for this delusion to vanish. But when I opened them, the lights in the mirror were no longer behind. They were right next to my door. A massive black sedan with no license plates and windows tinted to coal was floating beside me. I heard no sound from its motor, saw no driver. The car simply glided over the asphalt, its wheels not touching the ground, like a ghost that had caught up with its prey. I began to scream, just so I wouldn't have to hear the silence in my own head. I gripped the wheel so hard my fingers went numb, and then the radio, which I had manually switched off, suddenly came to life. The speaker crackled and a voice emerged from it. It was my own voice, but there was no life in it. It was an echo from a deep, cold crypt. Ostap, stop. You have nowhere left to hurry. We are all here already, waiting for you. At that moment, time in the cabin simply broke. I saw the digits on the electronic clock begin to count back the minutes with incredible speed. The darkness around became so dense that I could no longer see the hood of my own car. Only the black sedan to the side and the woman who now appeared at every kilometer. And each time she stood closer and closer to the center of my lane, I realized this was a trap set by the road itself. If I so much as touched the brakes now, I would remain in this time loop forever, becoming part of the 400-kilometer mark. I clenched my teeth until they ached. When the woman appeared for the third time right in the middle of the road, looking into my eyes with her empty sockets, I didn't slow down. I closed my eyes and just held the wheel straight, preparing for the inevitable impact, for the deadly somersault of metal against concrete. But there was no impact. Instead, I felt an incredible cosmic cold that passed through the entire cabin, piercing my body through as if I had driven through a wall of liquid nitrogen. When I was able to breathe again and open my eyes, the first thing I saw were the first rays of a real sun rising over the horizon somewhere in France. I was already near Reims. In my memory, there was an absolute void. I didn't remember driving through all of Germany, going through customs zones, or refueling. In fact, I looked at the fuel gauge and went numb. The tank was full to the brim, even though I should have arrived on the last of the fumes. I braked at the first parking lot, jumped out of the cabin, and fell to my knees, greedily inhaling the fresh morning air. My hands were shaking so hard, I couldn't even get a cigarette. I walked around the van to make sure I hadn't hit anything in that darkness. On the white side of the car, right where the black sedan had floated, I saw something that made my heart stop. There were marks. Not scratches, not dents. They were hundreds of prints of small palms, as if children were trying to hold onto the side of the car at a frantic speed. They weren't made of dirt, but of frost. A thick rime, even though a warm summer night reigned around. When I finally reached Paris and began unloading, I found something in the cargo area that certainly wasn't there during loading in Przemyśl. Among the boxes of electronics and clothes lay an old, faded toy, a doll with one ear torn off. It looked as if it had been lying in the ground for 20 years. Beside it lay a small note, written in the handwriting of my grandmother, who had passed away 10 years ago. There were only 2 words that now echo in my ears every night. Don't stop. Since that very day, I have changed my rules forever. I never go out on the E40 highway at night alone. I turn on every light in the cabin. I listen to music at a volume that drowns out any whisper, and I never, under any circumstances, look in the rearview mirror when I pass the 400-kilometer mark. Because I know for certain, the road remembers everyone who didn't make it or couldn't break free from its embrace. If you see 2 lights in your mirror now that strangely keep their distance and repeat your every move, don't try to race them. Just hit the gas and pray that your internal clock doesn't start counting back. The E40 highway knows how to keep secrets, and the best thing you can do is not to become one of them. The light of your headlights is your only weapon against the darkness. But remember, it always knows your next turn. Keep your soul as tight as you grip the wheel, for on this road, you are never truly alone. The world is full of borders, but I choose the path where there are none. The path from heart to heart, while the dawn still has the power to scatter the shadows of the past.